the City Travel with Kids podcast, helping you plan big city trips with kids. Brought to you by Little City Trips. Hello and thank you for joining us for this week's City Travel with Kids podcast. I'm Marianne Rogerson, and today we are talking all about flying with babies and toddlers. Today I'm joined by my two co-hosts. We have Kerry Hedrick. Hi, Kerry.
Hi, everyone. How are you?
And Marta Coriali. Hi, Marta.
Hi. Hello.
Now, I know the thought of flying with a baby for the first time can be a daunting one. We know, we've been there, and we get it. But we have also learned, after probably hundreds of flights between us with babies and small children, that there are definitely things you can do to make those flights easier and more manageable. So if you have a flight coming up with a baby, we are here to help. Today we're going to be sharing some of our top tips for flying with babies and toddlers. We're going to cover where to sit on the plane, what time to fly, what to pack in your carry-on bag, plus loads of useful tried and tested tips to make your journey go as smoothly as possible. So Kerry, tell me, do you remember your first flight with a baby?
I do. And it was pretty uneventful in my head. We only flew for 4 hours from Gatwick to Cairo. So it was a fairly short flight, but I definitely remember my first flight by myself. So we'll get into that later in the episode about flying alone with your baby for the first time. And I certainly remember Poogate incident and various other 16 hours on a plane with 3 under 5. I remember that. But the first one was pretty uneventful, I think, because we had 2 of us there. I wasn't as stressed as I have been on subsequent flights.
Goodness, I can imagine. How about you, Marta? How was your first flight experience?
It was a good one. Much easier and smoother than I thought it would be. I remember my son was 6 weeks old when we first got a plane together. So that was really early on. And we were going to Italy. So for us, that was about a 3-hour flight. I remember mostly my fear of that flight before getting on the plane. I was like, is it going to be okay? Or is his ears going to hurt? How is it going to work with, even just how would I going to carry him? It's like a lap infant. I didn't know about seat belts, all that kind of stuff. But then once we were on the plane, it went quite smoothly.
Yeah, I agree. I think the worst thing about it is actually the fear of the anticipation of what's going to go wrong. And actually, it's never as bad as you think it's going to be.
Yeah, and often, at least I remember in that first experience, I was really impressed with the kindness of strangers. I remember at some stage, we were both a little bit cold and the person beside me gave me their jacket to cover us up a little more. So that was lovely. It was a great first experience. I know it's not the same for everyone, but it does happen. And when it does, you feel like a really nice, warm feeling about it.
Yeah, that's nice. I remember it wasn't our first, but it was our second flight with my daughter. She was 12 weeks old and we were flying from Singapore to London. And this is back in our days of expat packages, and we were flying business class. And a guy got on, the grumpy old man behind, and he saw that we had a baby with us and he immediately asked to be moved and then kicked up a massive fuss when they said they had no seats for him to go to. And she was 12 weeks old and she was an angel the whole way. I think she cried on landing and that was it. And I was really wanted to just go and talk to him afterwards. I was so annoyed that he'd been so rude to us.
That is really rude. And also, sometimes adults are really annoying on planes and much more annoying than children. So I always think it's so unfair to just have, the dread on your face when you see a baby on a plane.
Absolutely.
Everybody has got a right to be there.
Absolutely. Right. Well, let's see if we can help make things easier for everybody if they do have flights coming up. Right, but before we get into our top tips for flying with a baby, I just want to remind you that if you want to be kept up to date with all our latest episodes, then don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. And if you like what you hear today, then please leave us a review. And if you have any questions about flying with a baby after listening to today's episode, or you have any other family travel questions, you can come and chat to us in our Facebook group, City Travel with Kids. We would love to see you there. Finally, I want to let you know that you will be able to find a copy of our show notes from today's episode on our website at littlecitytrips.com/podcast. And we will link to any relevant and useful information mentioned in today's episode there. So let's get on to all our top tips of flying with a baby then. Let's start with the timing of flights. What should we consider when we're booking our flights? For example, if we're flying long haul, are we better flying overnight or taking a day flight? What do you think, Kerry? Can you start us off with this?
Sure. I think there'll definitely be people that disagree with me on this. We all have our own timings that work with our children, but I have always found that the overnight flights work best, particularly for the long hauls, because you can get a long stretch of sleep in. But it really depends on your flight timings as well. Like where we live in the Middle East, a lot of the flights leave at sort of 2, 3 a.m. in the morning. So although it's an overnight flight, you kind of can't keep your children up that long until you fly. So they've got to have an interim nap before you fly and then try to get them resettled on the plane. So it's a bit of an argument. Would you rather they're more alert and awake to get them to the plane and then they sleep? Or would you rather they be cranky, tired, but then guaranteed to sleep as soon as you get on?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if anyone disagrees with me on that or prefers the daytime flights.
I do. I actually prefer daytime flights, so that I always find it interesting to see, as always with traveling with kids, it really depends on the child. I think for me, it all comes down to our very first experience where we got an overnight flight thinking that it will be really smooth and easy. We thought the kids would sleep and we would all be, if not rested, kind of reasonably okay on arrival. And of course, what happened is that my son did not sleep a minute. So he was exhausted by the end of it. He was too excited by the plane to fall asleep. And the problem is that then I was exhausted and my husband was exhausted because it meant that we got a complete white night. So from that moment on, it's only daytime flights for us.
What sort of age were you, Marta, when you took that flight?
My daughter was 2 and my son was 4.
Yeah, difficult ages because definitely like a 2-year-old is stimulated by everything around them. And if they're stimulated, then everyone around them needs to be stimulated too, don't they?
Yeah. I mean, a big thing, I think it's also like the length of the flight, as you were saying, are we talking about a 6-hour flight? Because in that case, they might not get the time to fall asleep if they're excited. If we're talking about a 12, 14-hour flight, well, then they will eventually fall asleep.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that's certainly the rule that I would work on too. So, for example, when we fly to the Middle East, to Southeast Asia, that might be a 6-7 hour flight for us. So I'd probably aim for a daytime flight then. But any of our big long hauls we do to Australia or to America, definitely the overnight flight where we can maximize the number of dark hours on the plane seems to work better for us.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. And the other thing I think you need to take into consideration is timing to help with jet lag when you do the long haul. Because sometimes, for example, if we used to fly from Asia back to London, those flights can arrive at like 5 in the morning. And then you've got the entire day to get through and try and get your kids onto the time zone. And with very young children, that can be pretty tricky because it's hard to keep them awake because they're generally in the buggy and they'll just fall asleep when they want to. So that's another
absolutely.
thing.
I'd completely agree with that, Marion. When in my experience, if I can get a flight that lands me sort of middle of the afternoon, that is perfect. Try and avoid the nap. If they're a younger child, obviously they still need an afternoon nap, but keep it short. But try and drag them out to the normal bedtime in the place where you're landing works best for us.
Yeah, I agree. We've learned this with, a lot of the flights from the US come back into Ireland at 5 a.m. and that's a very long day to go through when both you and your kids are tired and jet lagged.
Yeah.
And would you let a nap happen during the day, Marta, when that happens, or you power through?
I would like to say that I was able to control that, but my children just napped or didn't nap entirely on their own schedule. So I would just have to go with the flow. Jet lag was always really tough on us, so we just learned to like a few tricks to deal with it, like getting in a lot of fresh air, healthy eating and all this kind of stuff. But I think we just learned that, with long haul and jet lag, you just have to, mortar through and eventually it will settle again.
Yeah. And I think the important thing with jet lag, I think a lot of people overthink it too. Like if you are going on a short holiday, does it matter if your body clocks are completely adjusted by a couple of hours? So certainly when we go, all the way from the UK back to Australia, we need to do a complete body clock adjustment. You can't get away with it. But if you're only talking about a few hours, maybe just try and slip into a new time zone with your bodies rather than forcing adjusting to the jet lag.
Also, I think with very young children, I mean, their routine will be out of whack for a little while, but it will settle back. So I would say just reassuring people that at least in my experience, sure, you may have 2-3 days, maybe even 4 or 5 sometimes that could be, out of sync, but they will slot back in. So, jet lag or long haul flight will not undo all the good that you've done, settling your baby or toddler into the good sleeping routine.
Yeah, especially I think if you're going on a holiday where you might want the kids to stay up a couple of hours later anyway. so you can all go out for dinner and
Yes.
things. It can actually be quite
Yep,
handy.
that's worked perfectly for us when we do our Asia trips because, we're about 3 hours ahead and we can stay up late into the evenings with the kids then, and we might get a little bit of a sleep in the morning.
Yeah,
Yes.
I love your
Famous
optimism.
last words.
Okay.
But the one thing I certainly do try to do is try and adjust the food schedule as well. So don't just think about the sleeping, think about your food intake, and sounds revolting, but think about your body's bowel movements and that sort of thing. It takes a while for all of those things to adjust. So the sooner I can get the kids eating at the right times, then the sleep kind of slots itself around that.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah.
Okay, so here's another common question. Where should we sit on the plane with a baby or a toddler? Any advice for that, Marta?
I would say it depends whether you're flying with one or more. When we had only our son, he was tiny, but he loved sitting next to the window. It gave them a little bit of room. He could just look out. Like, he absolutely loved to do that. Well, now that we have 2 children, then, on bigger planes, we always try and get the 4 seats, like I was in the center of the plane, because that allows to create, like, it's almost like a little den. There's our little house for the long haul flight, and I've got myself and my husband at the 2 external sides of the aisles, and the kids are in the center.
Yeah, we do that too. Block them in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but also, like, the mess is contained. I think, as much organized as you can be, and you don't have a lot of clutter, like kids will have, maybe a travel pillow or their blankie or their bag, their things. And I just think keeping that contained in between the 2 parents is nicer for the other passengers too.
And
I think we've all been there with the plane cave, haven't we?
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And what about bassinet seats, Kerry? Did you ever book those when you had the little babies?
Yeah, definitely. Let me speak from my own experience on this. On many occasions, we made the mistake very early on flying with our first baby of thinking that booking a lap infant automatically gave you the bassinet seat. I think we just got lucky with our first few flights, and we did. And then we turned up for a big long haul and we're told, no, you don't have a bassinet seat. And I can tell you hormonal tears were running down my cheek at this point when I was told I couldn't have the golden gem of the bassinet seat. So for anyone who's not familiar with them, they are like a basket that can hang off the bulkhead wall in the front of a cabin in a long haul aircraft. So if you miss out on the bassinet seat, though, this did teach us a new tactic, which we call the empty seat tactic. And that is when you have got that row of 4, or if you're on the side, a row of 3, is that you book adults at either end of the row and leave the middle seat empty, because the middle seats are always the last ones to go when people are selecting seats. And if you are lucky, that seat will be left empty for you to put an infant in.
Yeah, if you're lucky.
We've done that many, many times. Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't try doing it at a peak time, like if you're flying around popular holidays. But if you're flying completely off peak, the aircraft's not full. We always check that when we check in at the counter, how full is the aircraft. And we found as soon as the baby wasn't able to fit in the bassinet, which is maybe around 12 months for most infants, then we would go a different tactic, which is to try and get a full row to ourselves further back in the plane.
And the other thing I quite like about having the bulkhead seat with the bassinet is you've got a lot more leg room, so there's room to put all your paraphernalia that generally comes with traveling with babies, and
one of you can slip out of the seat.
Yeah, and they can also play on the floor when they're a little bit older as well down there.
Although, as long as the host, he doesn't catch you.
Well, one thing I would say though is if you are booking the bulkhead seats, a thing that you really need to know is that the armrests don't raise in the bulkhead seats because you generally have your tray table stowed inside it. So while it's good for having a baby because you want the bassinet or the extra room, once you have a toddler who might want to lie down on the plane, you can't lift those armrests, and that can make a real difference. I think sometimes it's better going a few seats back where you can actually lift the armrests and let the children lie down flat.
Yeah. Another one we learnt by experience too is once you are travelling with 2 children, don't feel that you have to all travel together as a group. We actually found once we had 2 and then subsequently 3, it was easier for one adult to take the toddler and the older children and one to sit in the bassinet row by themselves. That way you could each cycle around taking turns who's sitting with them as well. Certainly when mine are at toddler age, they kind of are like constant entertainment machines, whereas the person with the baby, yes, they need feeding and what have you, but they sleep a lot of the time too. So that can help break things up, so at least each of you gets a little rest on the plane.
I think one thing that is interesting, and you touched on it when you talked about the bassinets, is that, you booked a lap infant and you thought you'd automatically had the bassinets. And one thing that that we have learned is that flying with babies and children, very few things happen automatically.
Yes.
You would assume that they will put you all together if you have young children, but often that doesn't happen. You often have to actually ask to be sitting together, pre-book your seats. So I would just say it's a little bit more of an active booking exercise when you book a plane seat with children. So don't presume that families will be together, that you will get the bassinets, that you will be in a nice seat, because it may well not happen.
Yeah, it highly depends on the airline as well. And more airlines now are charging premiums to book either bulkhead seats or to be actually seated together even. So
Yeah.
it's a real problem for families.
Another thing I've also found is that they will quite often give those front seat priority to their frequent flyers over families. And that I've seen that happen many times before as well. So don't assume just because you ask for it that you will get it either. Because if there's someone who's got diamond status on there, they may just gazump you for that front seat.
Yeah. Can I talk about another thing as well, Marion, about when you're travelling with 2 children under 2? Mm-hmm. There's different rules apply. So everyone might think, well, it's fine. We talked a bit about lap infants. So a lap infant means you only book an infant ticket rather than a full seat, and they sit on your lap. As I said, you can get lucky and perhaps spread them out to a spare seat. But if you want them to have a seat for their own, you can buy an under 2 their own seat and put them in an approved car seat. Marion, I think you know a bit about what is an approved car seat.
Yeah, I've just done some research into this recently. So not all car seats are allowed on the plane. So if you want to take a car seat onto the plane, and the Federal Aviation Authority do say that it's the safest way for children to travel, if you want to take it, it must be an FAA approved car seat, which means it must have a sticker on it that says it is allowed to be on the plane, basically.
Is that just for US-based carriers, or does that apply internationally?
Well, that's a tricky one. The FAA only has authority over US airlines, but the majority of international authorities also require you to have an approved car seat. So really you need to have that. The difference seems to be that US airlines, if you have a car seat and you take it on the plane and it does have a sticker on it, and as long as you have booked a seat and paid for it and your child is within the right weight regulations for that seat, the airline has to allow you to use it, and they have to help you fit it if you need them to. And if it doesn't fit in your seat, they are required to find you a seat where it will fit. So I know a lot of people now are preferring to take their car seats on the plane, because especially if you've got a young baby who enjoys being in the car seat and sleeps better, it actually makes it easier for you. But you do need to pay for the seat for the baby, because they won't just give you one just because you've got your car seat with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And when it comes for ticketing for infants as well, another thing to note is that if you have got twins, for example, and they are under 6 months, you must have an adult for each child. And if you've still got 2 children that are under 2, you can only have a maximum of 1 child per adult seat. So you can have 1 lap infant and you can have 1 in a car seat.
Okay.
So there's just a few rules to bear in mind before you book your tickets if you've got multiples or 2 close in age.
Okay, good to know.
Right.
Okay, let's talk about food, eating and feeding on the plane. I think the most common advice I've heard for flying with a baby is to feed on takeoff and landing, due to it helping the baby cope with the changing air pressure. And that's great advice, but there's a bit more to think about than that, isn't there, Marta?
Yeah, I mean, feeding is just one of those things that also changes so much depending on the age of your child. So when I was flying with a baby, I remember I was, breastfeeding. So that was quite easy for me. I remember we were given a little seatbelt extension, for him to be on my lap, and I could latch him on and off without problems. Interestingly, I have heard just recently that people being told that they cannot feed during takeoff and landing. Apparently, some airlines insist that the child faces forward during takeoff. And that has left me stunned, because I always fed them. So it's like, oh God.
Yeah, me too.
I don't know how to deal with that. So I guess, as always, it is good advice, but maybe just try and be up to date with the latest regulations, just not to find yourself caught in a moment where maybe you started feeding in good faith and then you're forced to kind of stop doing that, because that obviously upsets everyone. Then when the kids are a little older, then like I am like the master of snacks. So I just have snacks for pretty much any minute of our flight. And I just find, keep giving them snacks that they're used to and then they like, and keep giving them their fluids to make sure they stay hydrated. Just goes a long way to make their flight a lot more comfortable.
And what about bottle feeding? Do you have any tips for cleaning bottles or using formula or anything on the plane, Kerry?
Yeah, I mostly breastfed all of my children until about a year old. So we only had a short phase where we went through needing formula and bottle washing. Certainly on the big long haul flights, I never had a problem taking my bottles to the back of the plane, and they would give me some boiling water to rinse my bottles in. They could help with cow's milk. Formula you'd need to bring on yourself though, and formula rules are really, really tricky. I would certainly recommend people look up what latest regulations are before boarding a plane. There are exceptions to the 100 ml liquids rule when you are travelling with baby milk, but I know I've been stopped at airports before now to drink express milk. I've been asked to open cartons. I've not been asked to open cartons, walk through with complete bottles of water. It seems to really depend on the airport and who's on that day.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I've always found going through Asian airports, they let you through up to the age of 4 or 5 with kids. They'll let them take water bottles through. But coming through London, I've been stopped and asked to drink out of all the bottles. And of course, when you're a new mum and you've got a small baby, that's the last thing you want to do because you think of contamination and all these kind of things. And if you're made to open premixed formula,
it only lasts a few hours.
Exactly. So I think I think that's good advice to check ahead, because you just don't know based on the airport and the country that you're going to.
Yeah, and if I can add something, I would say that applies also to older kids, which is the time when you are less worried about it because you bring, the same food that you may bring for yourself. But I remember just a few years ago, we were flying from Europe to the US, and I felt very organized because I had a really nice Tupperware with fruit in it for my daughter, because her stomach always gets a bit upset on planes. And I thought this will keep her healthy and hydrated. And sure enough, at customs control that we cleared in Europe, we were told that we were not allowed to bring fruit into the US, and we had to throw it all out.
We had exactly the same incident, Marta, flying out of Abu Dhabi airport as well. They've got US pre-clearance on this side. Huge Tupperware of fruit had to be thrown out before we even got on the plane.
Yeah, I would say there is some lead where, like, if it's cut up, and there's no seeds or anything, or if they say, listen, just make sure you get them to eat it before they actually board the plane. But yeah, just to be aware that can well happen.
We were told it had to be packaged, so packaged snacks, but no fresh and cut up food.
Rice cakes is the answer to everything in the family.
And you'll find the same coming into Australia as well. And actually, when you board, Australia has extra security after security. So right when you get to the gate to get onto a plane to Australia, they will confiscate even water bottles that you've bought past security from you. It's very frustrating.
Correct. And landing in Australia, they will actually let you take fresh fruit onto the plane with you. But when you land, you must throw it into the customs bins. Otherwise, you will find sniffer dogs following you. And even if you're not guilty, you will feel very nervous.
Okay.
One other point I wanted to bring up about breastfeeding mums as well is remembering the change in your body cycle. I guess we've talked about sleep patterns and how they change with jet lag. You've got to remember that your body is still producing milk at the time of day that it thinks it needs to produce milk. So even though you may have done your best to adjust the baby sleep cycle during the flight, your boobs might not have adjusted. So definitely remember the breast pads. Been there, done that.
Good advice. Yeah. And then finally, the other thing I wanted to talk about was toddler meals on the plane. Again, we were talking about don't assume you're going to get the bassinet seat just because you're flying with a baby. And also don't expect that you're going to get a child meal just because you booked a child ticket. You do need to book that ahead. If you want a child's meal, you need to book it specifically on the website.
Yeah, I think we've all fallen for this one at some point, haven't we? Then there comes that tricky question of what to do when your child is on solids but not sitting on a child's seat. And I think a trick all of us have managed to pick up over the years is to order a child's meal on your adult ticket, so that your lap infant can have that meal. And then when they come around with the general tray service, they always have extra trays left over to make sure that you get one as well.
I didn't know that trick. That's a clever one.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, the one thing I would say about the child meal is also check with their airline if it's included in what's served on your long haul or not. Because, on some airlines, we do get adult meals for free. But if you have a special request for a child meal, that can be a supplement when you book it, maybe online before you flight. It's just important to be aware of it, because it can be quite steep. So, you just don't want to have bad surprises in terms of budget.
And also be careful of the time of day they serve the meals too. As I mentioned, a lot of the Middle East airlines fly out at the middle of the night, and then they want to serve dinner at 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning. So they bring out the kids' tray. Of course, they're fast asleep, and then the children wake up a few hours later and they say, no, we don't serve the next meal until we're about to land. So back to Marta's point earlier, snacks, and more snacks.
Yeah.
And beware the sugar-filled chocolate that they always put on the child meal as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Some of the so-called healthy options for children are quite funny, actually, because there's an amount of sugar that's shocking and the kids love them, so they gobble them up. But yeah, maybe not what you want in a confined space, like an airplane cabin.
No. Okay, moving on to one of our favourite topics, and that's what to bring with you and what to pack. Now, we do cover all of our favourite travel products in our podcast episode number 3, so if you missed that, be sure to go back and have a listen. But for now, let's talk about some useful travel gear for flying with babies and toddlers. And also, let's talk about some of the things we should think about packing in our carry-on bag. Kerry, you're our stroller expert. Why don't we start there?
Right, I can tell you that this revolutionized over the time between I had my first and my third child because of the advent of these compact strollers that can actually come on the plane with you. So I can very distinctly remember carefully wrapping up my 3-piece pram and checking it in through the check-in the first time I flew. Since then, we have moved on to having a compact mountain buggy nano, which is perfect because it folds up into carry-on size luggage, fits in the overhead locker, and then it's immediately available when you get off the plane. In my experience, every time we have checked a pram, it doesn't come back to us until we get to the baggage carousel, and you've got to wait for oversized items, which means we're almost always the last people to leave the airport because we're waiting for the oversized items to come in. So if you have the option of getting a compact, I would definitely say that's the way to go these days.
Yeah, because also if you don't get your stroller back until the carousel, you've then got to carry your luggage and probably your child all the way through the airport till you get there as well, don't you?
Correct. And I've done it once with 3 children by myself and don't recommend it. So yeah, the Nano absolutely revolutionized travel for me. But as well as that, I normally take an ergo carrier with me as well, which is the ability to strap at least one child onto me. So I've got my hands free for handling luggage.
And we talked about earlier about car seats on the plane. And I think if you do want to take a car seat onto the plane, especially with a baby, having a travel system can be really handy, can't it? So you can take the car seat straight out of the taxi or whatever when you get to the airport. You can clip it onto your stroller. You can take the stroller right to the gate and then unclip it and carry the car seat onto the plane. And particularly if you've got a sleeping baby, that can just make it such a difference.
Yeah. But what some people might not realize is if you are taking the car seat onto the plane with you, you are responsible for getting it all the way to the plane. So you can't leave it at the check-in and it will arrive for you at the aeroplane. It's something you've got to carry. So yeah, having a travel system definitely works better if you're bringing a car seat on with you.
Okay, what else should we have? What should we think about putting in our carry-on bag, Marta?
I would say the big thing is very many changes of clothes and not just for the kids, for yourself too. I just think when food comes on the plane, there's great excitement. My kids are always looking out for the trolley, but then the worry and the inevitable spilling of orange juice and anything else that's on
and bodily fluids.
Bodily fluids.
Absolutely. So I think we all had this thing that we had, our carefully, selected, small packing list. You only have your essentials, and then you spent a week trying to get a stain of oranges off your own trousers. So I would say, changes of clothes. Always a few more that you think you will need, and that's for kids and mom and dad.
Absolutely.
And then that obviously goes with all the other essentials that could be extra nappies, or if the children use dummies or soothers. I know my 2 did, both of them. They actually came in quite handy on the plane because that helped them having something to suck on. And I would say again, bring a few extras should they, fall on the floor, get ruined, get lost, fall and roll under the feet of the person sitting behind you.
Yes.
You just want extras for everything.
Absolutely. I know you hear these horror stories of planes being stranded on the tarmac for 6 hours. And I always think, oh my goodness, can you imagine if you've got a small baby on there and you've only got enough formula and nappies for a 2-hour flight? What do you do? So yes, always have extra of everything.
Yeah.
And something we have found handy over the years as well is to keep a grab bag. So given all this paraphernalia we're carrying, there's no way you can travel light when you're doing this. So you do end up with quite a bulky sort of nappy bag or diaper backpack or something with you. We like to try and put that up in the top of the plane just for when we need it, but have a change bag or a grab bag the most essential items that you can put in the seat pocket in front of you.
Yes,
I agree.
that was one of the best pieces of advice I was given, I think, was having that.
Yeah, it's the same. Like we travel really light, but with the exception of, the baby bag or the children's bag, because, you will need things, you'll need your supplies, you'll need the extra toy, the extra comforter, the extra anything that can make the flight more pleasant for them. Because, if they're happy, then you're happy and the other passengers are too. So I think it's really worth having a little more, whatever it is that can suit them. I find like we always put in, like, if they're the blanket that they like, or obviously cuddly toy is always a big thing, it goes a long way to help them settle.
And then we did cover this quite substantially in our products episode, but let's just touch on it quickly here as well, is toddler pillows. Kerry?
Yeah, if we're talking about the sort of pillows that they can use for their legs, then these have become the absolute hottest piece of travel property at the moment, and for good reason, because I know so many people who it's worked successfully for. You can lie toddlers across your laps, but they can really get a better sleep if they're able to extend their legs out in front of them. And I guess for the adults as well, you've all got a little bit more moving room. The only issue with them is that a lot of airlines won't accept them. So it's very, very important to check with your airline before you bring any sort of kids travel pillow product with you that it will be accepted.
Yeah, they were an absolute game changer for us for our long haul flights. But yes, unfortunately, a lot of airlines have banned using them, haven't they? But there you go. And what about the neck pillows? Marta, I think you're a neck pillow fan.
Yeah, I find them really good. Like we never had the leg pillows, but the small, children and neck pillows like work great. The kids love them. It becomes one of the things that they're looking forward to using, on the flight, which again, I just think flying with children is a lot about setting the mood right and taking the anxiety away from them. And once they're in their seats, having the extra support for the neck can really help. We mentioned this when we talked about them in the, our recommended product episodes, but I think it is really worth buying a pillow that is just for kids, so that you're sure it's the right size and keeps the neck in the right position, doesn't hurt their shoulders. They're not that expensive usually, and they make a big difference. So if you can, just get one each and don't share your own, because that can I
totally agree with you on that one, Marta. That's since we've kind of moved up to the next age group now, neck pillows have been a complete game changer for us. It means they can kind of sit sideways but still get their head snugly on the plane.
And many you can use in cars as well. So that's the kind of thing that, if you have a mix of, a long plane journey and then maybe a car trip on arrival, or going on a road trip there, then some of them are suitable also for car seats. So, again, it's something that it's worth carrying with you, because you'll find you using it over and over again.
Okay, while we're talking about toddlers, I think flying with a toddler is a whole nother ball game again, isn't it? I think as daunting as new parents find the first flight with a baby, I think perhaps the prospect of flying with a toddler who won't sit still and is likely to have a tantrum at any moment can be even more terrifying to some parents. So let's talk about what we can do to keep our little toddlers entertained on the plane. Marta, you talked about snacks. What about toys or keeping them entertained with activities?
Yeah, so we always bring toys. Well, we always used to bring toys when our kids were toddlers. And I'd say the big thing I would say is please bring silent toys.
Yes, thank you for saying that.
or if you have a tablet, an iPad or something that you're happy for them to use, again, think of the people around you and use kids' headphones for that. Like, I think, my kids, but I'm sure all kids are the same, they would maybe watch an episode of Peppa Pig over and over again, easily for 6 hours, and then kind of drives you and everybody else crazy very fast.
Something important to note, though, is that a lot of little ones, till about the age of 3, they just did not want to keep those headphones on either. So if you can download any apps that are easy sort of play and slide type games that they don't need the sound for, that would really help all the neighbours around you on the plane too.
I agree. I find I'm not particularly strict when it comes to screen time on planes. That's a big exception to what we do when we're home. But I just think sometimes rather than screen, I find kind of traditional toys better on planes, just because I don't have to worry about the noise and bothering other people. So even just sticker books really work for us. They are very simple, but keep them entertained for hours. They don't bother anybody. They're not made of small bits that can fall on the floor. So that's one of our secret weapons, I would say, for flying with toddlers. And if you get the one for little kids, they like stick on, stick off, they
Yeah,
literally
the
go on with
reusable.
it for ages. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think also toddlers just have such a short attention span, don't they? So having a little bag of tricks can be quite good. Having like lots of activities, different sticker books or coloring books or those watercolor things or even Play-Doh.
Yeah, exactly.
I take Play-Doh,
Yeah,
and
aquadoodle.
I know the aircrew can frown on Play-Doh, but I think as long as you don't let them grind it into the seat or the carpet, then I see no reason why they can't have a little bit of Play-Doh on the plane.
Yeah,
You can't see me vigorously shaking my head here, Marion. I hate the stuff.
I really.
Absolutely hate the stuff. I don't like it at home, and it's even worse on an aeroplane. But there is something called I think it's called squish or squash, and it's like a sort of like a stretchy Play-Doh equivalent, but doesn't leave any crumbs or mess behind. So that was a discovery we found that works for the plane.
Okay, good to
Yeah, I
know.
find these things like if they are hydrated enough, so usually if they're new, they're okay. Yeah, if you bring, the old Play-Doh from home that is really crumbly and
Yeah.
awful and it just doesn't work. I would say my main thing on planes is to just stay clear of anything that it's made of small pieces or stuff that can roll on the
Yes.
floor.
No,
So
no,
like
no parts.
puzzles, Lego. I know people, like I've seen online amazing little videos of people who make little Lego boxes, in Tupperware for their children to play with Lego. And I kind of go, that sounds like a great idea, but I know my kids that would be all over the floor in
Yes.
about a minute. So say anything that is made of small bits that can fall and be lost, I just rather not have it on a plane or
Yeah.
on travel in general, because then you'll know at least some of the pieces will be left behind, no matter what type of travel you're doing.
How about these mums who swear by wrapping up all their little new toys and so that their kids can unwrap one every hour? I'm like, who has the time to wrap up presents before you go traveling?
Marion, I could tell
Exactly.
you on average our flights are about 14 hours, and I have 3 children. I can tell you there isn't a chance on earth I am wrapping up individual presents.
I know.
We do try and make sure that there is a new toy in the bag for each time. So whether it's a new colouring book or a new one of those water wow books are brilliant. But no, I do not individually wrap them and have a new surprise for every hour on the plane. Don't try and
Yeah,
outdo yourself, mums.
I also find that at least with my children, like they get, if there's more than one thing to unwrap, they get excited about the unwrapping. So instead of focusing on the actual toy, they kind of go, and what's next? What's next? What's next? That can be endless, because the
I'm just
unwrapping
thinking of the
becomes.
trash pit, the trash pit in the cave that you've created.
Yes.
I just think for me, like the best way is like I mentioned it with the pillow is like to prepare them for the flight. So I always, even now that they're older, like I talk to them about the flight and I make sure that there's something they're excited about, for that flight. So that can be a new travel pillow, a new blankie, a new book, a new, whatever it is that you get them to have on that flight. And then, the excitement kind of lasts for quite a while, So I don't think it has to be a new thing every hour or any amount of time, but maybe one new thing either on the plane or before that is useful.
And what about snacks? We talked about it briefly. We know you like rice cakes, Marta. Any other good snacks that we should take?
If you can take fruit, as we mentioned before, I find that's always the best to bring. I always sometimes just make little sandwiches for them. Again, check with the airline that you're allowed to bring in whatever it is that you want. But, small sandwiches, fruit and rice cakes is our go-to thing. Raisins, little box, the individual boxes of raisins. I know my kids love them. And water, 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 a lot of water, because both you and the kids will need to stay hydrated.
One thing I would say, actually, which I learned the hard way, is the air pressure, what it can do to your water bottle. So if you pop up the straw, you can find that there will be a spurt of water go all over your neighbours. So you do need to unscrew the top first before you pop the straw up. And the other thing is those fruit pouches, those Ella's Kitchen or whatever, is that the same thing can happen. So I absolutely have banned those on the plane. They're fine for the airport, but you do not want to be opening one of those on the plane because that's where your change of clothes comes in.
It's funny because they have been unofficially banned from our school as well. Just the other day, it's like, please, please, please do not put pouches in your kids' packed lunch. No fruits, nothing that can be like squished out and just make a sticky mess everywhere.
Kerry, you've got any other favourite snacks you bring along?
No, I think you've pretty much covered what we would put in our snack bag as well. And we have learned the hard way about things like pressurized bottles. We do bring sweets for the children as a special treat. So especially on a longer flight, it might be if you can get to hour X, then you can have a sweet now. But absolutely do not overdo the sweets and the sugary food on a plane because, you will pay for it if you do
Yes,
give
exactly.
your children sugary food. So I'm normally not terribly strict, but confined on an aeroplane with my own children is the time when I do get incredibly strict about it.
Okay, and what about before we get on the plane? Have you got any tips for tackling the airport with babies and toddlers? Kerry?
A lot of people might not be aware that most airlines will let families pre-board. So at the same time when they're saying let their platinum customers in and disabled customers, they will let families come to the front of the queue to try and get organised first. That's definitely something we did when we had infants. But as we moved up into the toddler stage, we stopped using that service and tried to be one of the last ones on the plane because we wanted the kids to exhaust themselves as much as possible before getting on. But I really think it depends how much you need that overhead locker space if you want to use that pre-boarding.
And also you could also split up, couldn't you? So one of you could go on early and get everything ready.
Yeah, definitely. Once we had 2+ kids, we used the person with the infant used to go on first and get the camp set up, and then the other one would take the older children to run around for a bit longer.
How about you, Marta? You got any tips for the airport?
My main thing, and maybe this comes from me being a nervous traveler, a frequent traveler, but a nervous one, is just take your time. Just go early, give yourself time to settle, take time to eat in the airport if that's the right time for you. I just find personally nothing stresses me more than arriving last minute. And I know that some airports have, priority lines for families and everything, but still give yourself all the time you need because, you never know. You may have to slip in an extra changing session that will delay you, or it may just take longer than you expect. So just give yourself time. I'm pretty much a 3 hour before boarding a plane kind of person.
Yeah, no, I am as well these days. Before we had the kids, I was turn up an hour before, and now I get there early so that I can get everybody fed, especially if we're flying long haul, because the food on the plane is never good enough for the kids, and I never have enough snacks. And so I just try and get there and get a good meal into everybody before you fly. I think also if you're with a baby, that can be, or a baby or a lap child, that can be great as well, because trying to eat on a tiny plane with your tray, with a lap child who's trying to grab everything can just be a nightmare. So I would quite often just eat before I get on the plane, and then I don't even need to get a meal.
Yeah, and I think again, like with these things, like if you know your children, you know what excites them. Like we, going back to Kerry's point of boarding first or boarding last, like we always board first if we can, because I know my kids are going to have those 10-15 minutes of wanting to look around, wanting to settle. And then I just think it's just better if that happens before you're under pressure to buckle them up and get them to sit still. So again, kind of know your child. If you think that they can do with getting used to being in the airport and getting in their mental space of getting on a plane, then, go early and take your time. And if you think instead it's better to get it over and done with very quickly, then you'll organize yourself a little differently.
I think I'm in the same camp as you, Marion. I used to be arrive at the seat of your pants and get straight on the plane kind of person, but we have very much stretched that out to the 3 hour before for an international flight. And largely because, one, you can get through the queue a lot quicker, but we also like to take advantage of the premium lounges. So we have a number of different credit cards and point systems that we can use the executive lounge, and that has made our journeys with the kids just so much more straightforward. You've got a nice quiet area to sit with them. They provide food and drinks before the flight. There's always a big change room in there. So they very much change the style. If we don't have a premium lounge, you'll see me moaning like a child, but that's the way we've become used to flying.
Okay, well, I think we've covered off a lot here today. Do we have any other top tips? There's a few more things I think we need to add in. Kerry, did you have anything to add?
I just wanted to talk a little bit about flying alone, because a lot of the long haul flights I actually do by myself. And I say that casually now. I can tell you the first time I had to fly alone with my own offspring absolutely terrified me. I had two. One was a newborn and one was a toddler. I got so scared to the extreme that I insisted my husband use his points and upgrade us to business class so that I would have more room around me. And you know what? Nothing went wrong. And again, that fear that we build up in our body about what can go wrong, you just need to be a little bit more organized. So when I have the two with me, I would strap the infant onto me and then use the pockets in the carrier to carry things like passports, so everything was at grabbing driving distance, and then put a backpack on my back so hands were then free to deal with the toddler. But yeah, it's really not something to worry about. Don't fear traveling alone. Ask for help whenever it's available. If you need to pay for a porter to transport your bags, for example, it's money well spent.
Yeah, and if you can add, like when you're traveling alone with 2 kids, I remember when I had a baby and a toddler and I was by myself, the trickiest bit was actually passing security, because then, you have a toddler that might want to run ahead of you, and you have a baby that you need to take off your carrier when you're passing security. You cannot walk through with your baby on you. So that's really a moment when I think, get help. If you're in line, if there is a family line in airports, use it and see if there is anybody nice like on the line that you can say, can you just hold my toddler's hand for 1 minute while I take off my baby carrier and put my stuff under, the x-rays and stuff. I find, simple things like this, people do them for you, and, it makes everything much easier.
Yeah.
Because it can be tough. Like if you're trying to unbuckle things and, you have a toddler running around, that is nerve-wracking, that is stressful.
Yeah, and I've found whenever I have been on my own with the 2, that people are so helpful, really, generally.
Exactly.
Yes.
And the other one that makes people nervous is change time on the plane as well. Like if you've got the 2 children, one's asleep, but the other needs to go to the toilet or the change, that panic about leaving your child home. No harm in asking, as long as it's not during the middle of a meal service or when the staff are busy, absolutely no harm in asking the staff to help you at that time, either just to keep an eye on one child or hold your baby while you go to the toilet.
Absolutely. And I've always found them to be very accommodating.
Yeah, and I always found, I think it may even be a rule, though I'm not sure about it, that people told me, there's never a problem for the airline crew to hold your baby. If, for instance, you are like moving your bags around, you need to move around. So they're actually more willing to help you with the child than, let's say, with your bags. Yeah, apparently that's the way to do it. There was an airline crew member who told me that, like, it's always okay for the crew to just hold the baby momentarily. So don't be afraid to ask.
Okay, thank you, ladies. I think we've had a lot of good information today, and hopefully anybody listening will have found that very helpful. So before we go, remember that if there's anything you wanted to talk to us following today's episode, you can come and find us in our Facebook group, which is City Travel with Kids, and we can chat with you there some more. Remember that you will find a copy of our show notes from today's episode on our website at littlecitytrips.com/podcast, and we'll link to all the things we talked about today in there. If you want to be kept up to date with our latest episodes, then don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. And if you like what you're hearing, then please leave us a review. Until next time.
Bye.
Bye.